I am live. Yesterday I was interrupted just before I finished this chapter, Tweety Bird, of A Vague Vacation by Joan Marshall Grant. It was the 35th chapter. It is a journey through France with her then husband Charles. Joan was very famous for her far memory books, 7 of them, which played in ancient Egypt, Rome, Greece. But this one is a travel book, Tweety Birds, chapter 35. I start from the top of where it was then interrupted. By the time we had passed through the Tuileries gardens, we were amicable again. It was too late for dinner, but supper? Petrol was in splendid form. In that district there must be dozens of restaurants, yet we found none. Another hour passed, and again we began to argue. We must have a definite objective. We wanted to find a new restaurant so that barred any familiar haunt. I said I had seen one with a red awning near the Madeleine. Charles said he knew which I meant. But it was near the Étoile and had blue shutters. Further miles proved that neither of us was right. Still later we found ourselves outside Maxime's, and by now we were both sufficiently hungry to compromise. We had forgotten how late it was. The last lovely Tweeties were being ushered to their cars. Charles was in no mood for the discipline of pavements. He strode across the middle of the Place de la Concorde. I followed, uttering loud remarks as to the tiresomeness of being run down because one was fool enough to be led by an idiot to destruction. Suddenly there was a loud crash. It was not Charles exploding, but Petrol pulling some cosmic plug above our heads. Rain, which could not have been bettered by a film of the deluge, descended. A taxi ground slowly passed, but we both ignored it. Charles planted his hat on my head. Later it transpired that he intended this as a conciliatory gesture, but I thought he was only trying to make me look even more ridiculous. He picked his hat from the gutter and thrust it morosely into his pocket. The Boulevard Saint-Germain was the last lap of this marathon, which cannot have been less than 7 miles. The drowsing porter woke with a jerk when he saw us, leaving trails of water across the hall. "We like walking in the rain," I said crisply. "It is an English custom." "I believe you meant it," said Charles when we got upstairs. We found ourselves back in the Tour Argent. A waiter was presenting crêpes Suzette. "They're perfect," I said, "but nothing can be quite so good as the brandy and figs we had last night, while we laughed at ourselves in the bath." Now we are at chapter 36, and I continue. Oysters and oysters. We thought we had only another 3 days in Paris, although we had put off the reservation on the autocarrière from the 23rd to the 29th, and it did not run after the end of October. Soon we should not be able to indulge in unlimited oysters, so we returned to the brasserie, which was so conveniently close to our hotel. We each commenced with a dozen marronniers and followed them with a dozen ballons. On Charles' advice, I had never attempted the Portuguese, for he told me that the ones here would be stronger than those I had attempted at Premier's in London. But I am an exploratory eater, and would rather try something distasteful than feel I have missed opportunity. Only the day before I had the courage to ask for a single clam and a solitary oursin. When I was Greek, BC, sea urchins were served with the edible portion dissected, 4 delicate segments of apricot pink, but this specimen resembled a small black hedgehog which had been foolish enough to hibernate in seaweed. I forked at an amorphous grey mass until the kindly waiter pointed out that I was picking the wrong bits as well as the right. However, it was pleasant, though not worthy of real attention. The clam is easier to describe and avoid. A method of duplicating the taste would be to take a cubic mile of atmosphere adjacent to the main drain of any seaside resort, usually described to tourists as ozone. Compress to the consistency of half-set gelatine, inject a soupçon of pale blood and serve on the shell. I am glad to say I had the courage to spit it out before it could wreak havoc. I admit to a complete ignorance of other clams. There may be admirable relations who bear the same name, but the French variety I shall avoid with the care of a sponge fisher who would prefer not to lose an arm to one of its giant cousins. I was not born to oysters, but laboriously added them to my range of pleasures. It took nearly 3 years to train my palate, but gradually the quick gulp of the morsel, heavily disguised in ketchup or Tabasco, changed to contemplation of a treasure, naked save for a few beauty spots of pepper judiciously applied and scorning lemon. My daughter is of sturdier stock and relished her first dozen at the age of 8 and then demanded frogs. This is but the background of a bivalve saga which must have made the English stomach memorable upon that boulevard. Charles and I had 2 dozen each. We were not entirely full. The alternative upon the menu were such as we felt unworthy, though on occasion I am not superior to tripe or sausage. And remembering tripe, there was a minor tragedy in that same place on a different occasion. 2 Englishmen of the kind who deserve what they get, for they entered in an aura of contempt for foreigners, ordered ules, which sounded so close to tripe that they found themselves confronted with a bowl of healthful innards instead of the pleasing array of shells. It seemed reasonable, in the honourable quest of gastronomic knowledge, to sample each variety of oyster available. The bellon, the moraine, and the plein nord, the plein mer, we knew and admired. The Portuguese clair and vert and the petit gris were still undetermined. I should like one of each, I said to Charles, so as to decide which I really prefer. Charles conveyed our request to the waiter, but Piatnor was hiding under a tub of dusty artificial flowers, and made me convinced that Charles had asked for 2 of each kind. So I butted in and thought I made it plain that we required only another half a dozen each. One day, when you interrupt when I'm giving an order, I shall carve you in half, said Charles coldly. That the judge will not have the wit to recognize that the provocation was not only adequate, but excessive, will be clue to his limitations. I shall undoubtedly hang, and you will apologize wherever we meet to continue the argument. Darling, you're being quite tiresome, I said, with grueling forbearance. We have consumed 2 dozen oysters. Another half dozen is sufficient. Had I failed to help you, we would have another dozen, which I consider too many. We waited in comparative silence, both convinced that the future would prove our patient infallibility. I have seldom felt so smug with less cause. 2 waiters, each bearing a lordy dish, approached our little table with awe. In front of each of us we were placed 6 morinières, 6 bellons, 6 plein mer, 6 petits gris, 6 Portugaises verts, 6 Portugaises clairs. You will eat all yours, said Charles, and I hope you choke. I did well until the last 5 there. So strong, so greenish-black, so huge, defeated me. I'm sorry, I can't make it, I said with genuine humility. Then we can both leave the rest, he replied, but do not forget this incident. For it occurs again, you will eat the shells. He admitted next morning that he had longed for me to be sick, which was unworthy of his better nature and fortunately ineffective. So the next chapter is entitled The Bogus Baroness. Today is the 25th of January 2025. 25/1/25.